Welcome to Shinkido Martial Arts, and today we're going to be looking at another Iai practice, and we fondly call this Goju. So Goju means 50, although I would recommend practicing this more than 50 times. Maybe 10,000 times would be a good plan, but we start somewhere. So firstly, this is a way of, again, gaining functional understanding of both moving within yourself and moving with the sword in this case. But ultimately it's a way of it becomes quite meditative, a way of losing yourself within what you're doing. And that's what you're really trying to do. So that will give you sort of an indication as to how you might want to practice this. You just keep going until suddenly it's kind of like you're not doing it. So Goju. So we start with Kiritoshi, and the sword is already drawn. So we're at Jodan no Kamae. So from here you come up to Jodan no Kamae. Now this is a simple step forward and cut. So points to recognize here: the elbows are wide, the back is engaged, the lower dantian is rolled forward and slightly down. Pulling off the right foot forward and cut. So the point we're trying to get again is that the striking point here lands with the left foot. So if I do that very, very slowly here, strike, cut, breaking it down, strike, through to the final position. So it's almost like a settling. Now we mirror. So in this way, we're going to do this as 4 forward and 4 back. If you've only got space to do 2 forward and 2 back, that's fine. If at the moment you can get outside and practice this, then you'll have a bit more space. So we're just going to stick with the 4 forward, 4 back principle. We're going to start on the right foot. So we draw the sword, come to a Jodan no Kamae, and cut. So here, lift, step and cut. Lift, step and cut. Step and cut. So a couple of points to think about whilst we're doing this, and that is that rather than step, then cut, draw, and cut and move through as you're lifting the sword up, is that we're trying to get the point of the movement forward or backwards to the point of the strike. So we're just going to look at the shape of what we're doing through our front and back and how that helps with the both draw, in this case to the Jodai no Kamae, and the actual delivery of the cut itself in Kiritoshi. So we'll do this from Iaido. So as we lift, we start that action by slightly squeezing the feet in from Iaido and then releasing. And as we do, we think about the lower down chain going forward. Imagine a ball kind of doing this. So if we want to lift the sword, we pull the back down to the ankles. The front expands, and then to do the cut, the back expands and the front contracts. Now, there's one more thing. I'll just do this through my wrists. We covered this in the earlier video on the first kata. So at the point of delivery through the cut, we bring the wrists round here. Remember the ringing of the mop principle. Now we don't want to do this too hard because we're likely to break our sword. So, but it's just enough to increase the resistance and get the elbows behind. Now when I do this, I get this sense that in a way that my chest is being compressed ever so slightly, thus getting behind the cut itself. So if you find that your wrists are here, or if you find that the sword is dropping here, I think I mentioned this in the earlier video, it's likely to be you're putting too much power through the right arm. Remember, it's a pull and a push. So even as we lift or go to the Jodai no Kamae, pull and push, pull and push. So now we're going to put that action into the first passage forward and backwards. Now, I'm doing this as a 4-step for you. If you have enough space to go 50 steps forward and 50 steps back, then do that. If you only have enough space for 2, then do that. But try and do it a minimum of 50 times. Hence why it's called Goju. This is the first section of 4 within Goju. So now's a good time to break and to practice that section. Welcome back. So we're now going to be looking at the second section of Goju, second section of 4, having completed the first section. So we're now working onto our quarter cut, moving through, in this case from the right shoulder or left shoulder and down. Think about the gi line and you won't be far wrong. Now, traditionally there are many names for cuts and angles for cuts, and we're sort of concerning ourselves with the one that would come in, cross here, inside. If we had a sort of plate of armour coming off the helmet and coming up here, this is the point that we're looking at. So cutting effectively into the collarbone down to this point. Of course, there are many different cuts that we could otherwise look at. So within Goju, again, we have this step principle. But to start with this, we're going to look at how we swing the sword around, which is quite a different cut to the first cut, which is Kiritoshi. So we're just going to start again from our drawing the sword or katana, and I'm just going to start from this point. Now we're going to think about our hinges or hip hinges and how we create the cut from there. So the basic action is this: if I was cutting to my high right to low left, I would fold into my right crease. Notice how the kisaki is lifting, being drawn up, round, round, elbows to cut. And now I'm into my left crease. And then we come back. So we'll just go through that action again. So from here, folding into the right crease. Look at where the kisaki lifts, elbows to cut. So I'm just breaking that down a little bit forward so you can see the positions. Lift, lift, elbows. So if I were here, squaring up for you, it's Jodan no Kamae. Here to Kesageri. Lift to Kesageri. In this case, because we're striking into the opponent's left shoulder, it's Hidari. Lift. And notice how we've gone from a lifting point here, look at the rotation, to the cut, to a reverse. So we're now rotated into the left hip hinge. So if we move the opposite way, we rotate into the left hip. Notice how it's all together. Lift into the right hip hinge. Come back to center. Lift. So a big point that I often see is that the elbows collapse, or here. You can see where my elbows are. I haven't achieved that Jodan no Kamae position. So from the position here, from your Kiritoshi, if I come to here, we've rotated through at this point to then rotate to cut. This gives you a clear indication of how this second passage is done. Lift. So in this way you can think of it as a swinging of the sword. So this is a good point to pause before we move on to actually doing the 4-step forward and backwards, and practice as you mean. Welcome back. So we're continuing with the second section in Goju. So all these sections start with the sword from a drawn position. None of them actually start with the sword in the side. So in this way, it's a little bit more akin to Kenjutsu than maybe Iaido. So one of the big differences which I get asked is that in Kenjutsu, the sword is not always, but quite often already drawn. And in Iaido, one of the major principles is actually the drawing and striking the opponent or cutting, and then removing the blood and resheathing. So we start from this point. So in this case, we're going to step forward with our right foot. So as we turn into the left hip hinge, you'll get this sense that you want to do this. So as I do that, turn and step. Turn and step. Turn and step. Now moving backwards. In some of the earlier videos in some of the karate videos, which I'm sure some of you will have seen, we talked about this principle of to move backwards, rather than pushing off the front foot, we pull off the back foot. If we push off the front foot, we actually go forward. So in order to do that, we increase the pressure through the front foot, we then push off it, creating a spring. Well, in this case, we want to be able to pull straight back, so there is no forward movement. So from this point, again, fold, lift, remember the back, fold, So remember, I've done this as a step, 4-step forward, 4-step back. If you have less space, then do that. If you have, do it as maybe a 2-step. If you have more space, then use all the space that you have available to you. But you want to try and do this 50 times. Now for the length of the video, I'm only doing it a few times for you, but you get the basic principle. So this concludes the second section. And because there'll be questions, there'll be answers from questions as we progress into the next sections.